So, it has been a long and rough few months since this situation occurred, and I think it's time I broke the silence and cleared the air here. For those of you who aren't aware, I recently had a call with the showrunners of Death Battle, where I pitched my most wanted matchup directly to them. And while at the time I figured it was good, the response that the comment section formed said the exact opposite. A lot of people really didn't like my approach to the matchup and a few things I said in the pitch, and one person even took it upon themselves to make a 30-minute response video to the pitch and some of the comments I made in defense of my matchup. Now, before I go any further, I want to say what needs to be said. I did not take the criticism of my pitch well, at all. I got very angry, said some very stupid stuff, and at times couldn't even distinguish between reviews and rage bait. It wasn't a good look, and I should have done better. So for all of that, I am sorry. However, after taking some time to reflect and watching the video I'm about to respond to, I do still have Chara vs Sonic.EXE as my most wanted matchup. The way I presented it in my pitch was flawed, and after hearing the outcry I understand that, but I can't deny that I still love the idea for all it's worth. I've accepted that what I want out of this matchup isn't something a lot of people are gonna like, and that's okay. Everyone's got their own opinions, and going forward, I want to do my best to respect that. With that said, I watched through the video a few times, and while I can see why they came to the conclusion they did in this video, I disagree with a lot of what's said and would like to clarify on several points of the pitch. So here I am with an official, and hopefully final, response to them, as well as a few additional criticisms I received. And while I don't expect many people who dislike the matchup to suddenly like it, I do hope that you at least understand my perspective a bit better after I clear the air. With that out of the way, let's delve into it. So the person I'm going to be responding to today is named BonnieGamer64, BG64 for short. And what they primarily seem to do before responding to my video seems to be FNF vocal covers? At least, that's what I think most of these are. It's a little hard to tell with some of these thumbnails. And their video on me seems to be their most popular, sitting at around 20,000 views. Wow, lucky you. Also, before I start responding to it, let me make it clear that I do not support harassing this person. All this is a response to what they are saying in the video, not an attack against them as an individual, nor should it be interpreted that way. So I don't want to see any of you clowns going over to their channel just to bully them. Anyone who does that is not a spokesperson for this channel, and I do not associate with them in any way. I hope I made that much clear. So, with that out of the way...
Hey, so, quick disclaimer before this video starts. It's a little unscripted, but let me just get these out of the way. I don't mean to harass any, like, Chara versus EXE fans in the audience, and I also don't mean to, like, start this as, like, a, hate campaign towards Tony Sonic. Yeah, this pitch and everything he's been doing involving it was bad, but I'm not having this as a hate campaign towards the guy. This is not what this is.
Thank you for that. I'm glad we can agree that harassing each other over videos we disagree on is bad and should be disavowed. Hopefully, people will have enough common sense to listen now that both of us have said it.
Also, this video falls under fair use because I've been told that he does certain things with the copyright system.
I have no idea what you're referring to there. Never once have I used the copyright system to take down a video I disagree with, and if someone's been doing that under my name, they can go to hell, as the livelihood of YouTubers is very important to me, being a YouTuber myself. You're not helping anyone by taking down videos via copyright, you're just an asshole that can't take criticism.
Good times!
Let's get Chara out of the way first, since they're the more simple, but more complex at the same time. And if there are any Undertale superfans in the audience who see me get this whole thing wrong, then feel free to correct me in the comments. I don't remember much from Undertale since it's been a while since I played it, but please, if I get things wrong, please correct me. Chara is an ambiguous character, having a hatred for humanity and apparently being able to make a creepy face, but overall is a mystery of a character. One day, Chara became terminally ill from consuming a butterscotch pie made with buttercups. Chara wished to see the golden flowers in their home village, though nobody could fulfill it. After their death, Chara's soul was absorbed into Asriel, and they shared control over his body. Chara carried their own corpse across the barrier, and they were attacked by the humans in the village. Chara wanted to use their full power to destroy the attacking humans. However, Asriel resisted Chara, which ultimately led the humans to killing both of them. Chara's motives in this situation are uncertain. It is unclear if they favored either their hatred over humanity, or to free the monsters, or both.
Alright, I got a couple things to say right off the bat. For example, not a good idea to respond to a video involving an Undertale character without having played the game in a while. Nor is it a good idea to rely on a wiki for half your explanation on said character. Wikis can be unreliable as they're written by random people, and said random people can easily get stuff wrong, which leads to misinformation. Case in point, the blurb you read about Chara's backstory is only half right. Seeing as you ignored the part about Chara running to the mountain for unknown reasons, being adopted by the Dreamers, and living a happy life for a time, that's already not a good thing since that's pretty essential to Chara as a character. And the stuff about Chara being poisoned by eating a butterscotch pie filled with buttercup flowers isn't true at all. Asgore was the one who got poisoned after Chara and Asriel tried to make a butterscotch pie, but put in buttercup flowers instead, out of what's implied to be a pure accident. Because they're kids. After Asgore got better, Chara came up with a plan to use their soul to attain 6 other souls by eating a bunch of buttercup flowers themselves, which in turn got them sick and killed them. The stuff you said after the fact is mostly correct, but I wanted to clear the air on that first bit.
But when you make it to the genocide route, at the end of it, it's revealed that Chara had nothing to their name. Not the human soul you controlled, nor the determination. It was all you. They didn't do anything. It was your actions that twisted things into this. And it was your actions that gave Chara a new purpose. Power.
This bit is technically true, but there's a bit of stuff missing that's also important. Well, yes, Chara did have this big monologue about the purpose of their reincarnation and how they came to the conclusion that power through violence was it, there's more to them than just this. During the segment where you can fork over your soul to reform the world after Chara destroys it, Chara calls you out for perhaps thinking you're above consequences, implying they have a sense of justice for those who try to play God. This is expanded further in the soulless routes. If you go pacifist after the world's restored, Chara will take over Frisk at the end, and it's implied they killed everyone just like you did as a permanent reminder and punishment for what you did. If you go genocide, Chara will express their confusion at your actions, reforming the world only to destroy it again, flat out saying that you and them are not the same, and even suggesting that you go a different route should you restore the world again. All this proves that, while they may have come to the conclusion that power achieved through violence is good due to your actions, senseless bloodshed and acting as if you're above consequences is not something they understand or support. Yes, folks, this is where I got the Punisher versus Torturer theme from. I hope that clears that part up.
And now we can talk about X. For this, we'll be using the canon stuff about Sonic.EXE, and by canon, I mean the stuff made by Joe Doughboy. And specifically why we're using Joe Doughboy's stuff is because he's the current owner of Sonic.EXE. And just to get this out of the way now, yes, X and Lord X are the same characters, so we can use both in this. X is an interdimensional entity whose origins hail from the void. X is fascinated with humanity and the Sonic franchise, and those two things created a destructive mix, forming his vessel. His goals are to spread and cause pain and torture among his victims, him using said victims to fuel the vessels to keep his games going on indefinitely. And when X became Lord X, after his vessel has withered away after some time, he aims to claim all of humanity.
Alright, the stuff about Sonic.EXE's canon is all correct. However, there is something I want to add. Joe Doughboy only has partial ownership of Sonic.EXE. After all the drama with EXE's original owner, JC the Hyena, happened, he lost ownership of the character, and it was given to someone named SRL October 23, who then gave it to this person named... What in the Flint Lockwood? Yeah, I'm not pronouncing that. Let's just call them Astra. Anyways, EXE's ownership was transferred to Astra for reasons where I'm not entirely clear on, and at some point, Astra decided to split ownership with cohorts Raven and Joe Doughboy, who then proceeded to make 3 different versions of Sonic.EXE, with Joe Doughboy owning Lord X, as you said, Raven owning a 2017 reboot of Sonic.EXE originally made by JC, and Astra owning their own interpretation of Xenophanes separate from the FNF mod released in 2021. It's incredibly weird, but that's the current state of EXE's ownership.
So yeah, this matchup is, it's a little complicated to get it working. But clearly Tony didn't see that, seeing how much he... Wait, how much did he pay? $350!
Actually, I spent $500. The tier in question was the Gold Requiem tier that cost $500 in exchange for the matchup pitch and a slew of other goodies. Not sure where the $350 thing came from, but I do know that I don't regret a single penny spent, especially given the quality of episodes it contributed to making.
Okay, so before we start off, I just want to show off this funny clip.
Chara from Undertale versus Sonic.EXE from Creepypasta. The demon who comes when they...
You can tell this is after someone made their banger pitch on X versus Red, which actually is mentioned in this pitch. But, more on that later.
Or that could simply be their reaction to getting a third matchup involving Sonic.EXE. Yes, I was the third person to make a matchup pitch involving EXE. The other two were Red from the Godzilla NES Creepypasta, as you said, and Error Sans from Errortale/Underverse. And getting 3 different matchups for one character definitely muddies the waters on which one you should do, especially when there's aspects of all 3 that could be really cool to put in a fight.
So past the
Past the fan-made thumbnail he made for it, we go on to the connections. One of these connections, however, is him mentioning different topic, which is a Undertale AU where Chara is replaced with Sonic.EXE. Fan content. But trust me, it only gets worse from here.
Admittedly, I should have been more specific on this, but that bit is more so a point to how people in the fandoms already associate the two, rather than it being anything official. Of course it's not canon in any way, and never will be since it's fanon content, but that wasn't the point of the connection. Still should have explained that better though.
Next off, we have Is This the Best for Both panel, where he took 3 different matchups for the two and explained why this is good and the others are not.
Alright, before they continue, I want to elaborate on this portion of the pitch. This is one of the 2 most criticized parts of my video, and while I didn't think much of it at the time, I recognize that it was a bad idea in hindsight, so allow me to explain myself. On my channel, I like to be honest about my opinions on stuff, and when it comes to matchups, if I see one character with several options for opponents, I try to find a favorite and explain why the others don't really gel with me personally. That was the point of this slide, but due to my terrible wording and bad presentation, it came off as me attacking other people's preferred options. And for that, I am sorry. It was never my intention to actively diss these matchups. I actually do have some level of respect for all of these, and the people who like them, even the one with Monica. I just wanted to explain my own preferences, and I apologize to anyone who is offended by my words.
3 he chose for Chara, they are Monica, Amori, and the Batter. For Monica isn't a good choice according to him, because he's not a big fan, and he thinks Monica just doesn't work for Death Battle. For Amori, he says that Amori is a fine enough choice. And for the Batter, he says that the Batter is a good alt, but doesn't run deep unlike the theme of this fight. What theme is there for this fight? And for EXE, the 3 chosen for him are Fleetway Supersonic, Slender Man, and Red. For Fleetway, he says that Fleetway is surface level, and he's not a big fan of it. Which, okay, is understandable. This is a tap water fight. For Slender Man, for some reason he brings up other creepypastas like Jeff the Killer.
Slender Man obviously has better, like he has Sonic.EXE, Siren Head, and even Jeff the Killer if you want to go there.
I don't know how these 2 things connect. I don't think they do. To my knowledge, Jeff the Killer and Slender Man are 2 different creepypastas with no connection to each other, unless we count fan content, but other than that, Jeff and Slender have no connections to each other. Not even in the Slender Man movie. And Red lacks a core theme compared to Chara versus EXE have to them as characters.
It has a legacy, I won't deny that. There are several aspects that could be enjoyable. However, it lacks a core theme that Chara and EXE has relating to them as characters.
What do you mean it lacks a core theme? You're saying that like this one has a core theme when it really doesn't. This matchup doesn't have a core theme. You just matched 2 characters who are known for killing in their fandoms. What core theme is there for this matchup? What core theme can you get from a character who had less than 10 minutes of screen time compared to someone who is as massive as Sonic.EXE?
There is so much to unpack here. First of all, I already finished my proper response to this section, so I won't repeat myself, but I would like to point out, YouTuber to YouTuber, that it's generally not the best idea to lead off allegation videos like this by acting as if you haven't watched the video before, as it generally gives the viewers the impression of things that may not even be a factor to your argument. Like how you said my matchup has no theme here, only to reveal what the theme is immediately after the fact. It leads to a lot of misinformation and unintentional slander, especially since you didn't link my video in your description, which means viewers aren't readily able to watch it to make sure you're telling the truth. Now, you are about to get into that slide, so that's thankfully avoided, but it is something worth mentioning for the future. Second of all, regarding Jeff the Killer versus Slender Man, there's actually a lot more to that matchup than you think. Not only are they both popular creepypastas with black and white aesthetics, but they also have some nice contrasts, such as one being a monster that looks more like a man, while the other is a man that looks more like a monster, and one being known for not having a face, while the other is known for their nightmarish face. Furthermore, while it might not mean much since this bit is more community focused, the creepypasta community during its prime had these 2 fighting each other all the time. Not only did they make oodles of fan art depicting the 2, but there was also a crossover story made with them that later got both a narration by Mr. Creepypasta, one of the biggest creepypasta YouTubers at the time, and a fan animation based on it that's garnered 40 million views. Might not necessarily be canon, depending on what you define as canon, but it is a testament to Jeff versus Slender Man's legacy. Heck, for a while, Jeff was actually my preferred opponent for Slender Man. Then I learned about Sadako and my opinion changed. Don't worry, Jeffrey, I'll find you a new personal favorite someday. Thirdly and finally, the Red vs. EXE part of the slide was the most poorly worded thing I think I've said in one of my videos. What I said was frankly wrong, and I apologize to anyone who was offended by that. With that said, allow me to take this opportunity to say what I should have said for this matchup. Red vs. EXE is the popular one for EXE, and was even pitched to them already. While there are things I like about it, and it has a nice theme, personally, I'm not as invested in it as others are for purely personal reasons. If you're really invested in that matchup, then that's great, more power to you. But as a subjective individual with his own viewpoints, I'm drawn to Chara vs. EXE a little bit more for my own reasons. Also, as a footnote, I understand that you're probably playing up your anger for comedic effect, and while I'm sure some may find the humor in it, ranting and yelling this much makes it a bit hard to take your criticism seriously, as it makes you come off as rash and immature when it comes to responses. You probably didn't intend it this way, but to me, that's how it reads in the video, and this kind of thing continues for the rest of the video.
The next panel is this, and he talks about Chara and EXE. And he mentioned how Chara was a punishment for the player, which is wrong, as I already explained with the character of Chara.
See, the thing about Chara is, for many years, Undertale thought she was the big mass murderer of the game. They were the one that killed all the monsters, and they were the one to blame for how things went in the genocide route. But the reality of the situation, as the fandom came to realize, is that they were the opposite of that. They were the punishment waiting for the player at the end of the genocide route.
Sorry, my guy, but you really didn't. What you did was read off an excerpt from a wiki that was very inaccurate, and you missed out on half of the things Chara says and does in the actual game.
Chara is an ambiguous character, having a hatred for humanity and apparently being able to make a creepy face, but overall is a mystery of a character. One day, Chara became terminally ill from consuming a butterscotch pie made with buttercups. Chara wished to see the golden flowers in their home village, though nobody could fulfill it. After their death, Chara's soul was absorbed into Asriel, and they shared control over his body. Chara carried their own corpse across the barrier, and they were attacked by the humans in the village. Chara wanted to use their full power to destroy the attacking humans. However, Asriel resisted Chara, which ultimately led the humans to killing both of them. Chara's motives in this situation are uncertain. It is unclear if they favored either their hatred over humanity, or to free the monsters, or both. But when you make it to the genocide route, at the end of it, it's revealed that Chara had nothing to their name. Not the human soul you controlled, nor the determination. It was all you. They didn't do anything. It was your actions that twisted things into this, and it was your actions that gave Chara a new purpose. Power.
Now, if you genuinely didn't know these things, then fine, not everyone's super knowledgeable on Undertale lore. But while I don't fully blame you for using a wiki like this, I would recommend either talking to someone who knows Undertale really well, or replaying the game for yourself before you talk about something like this, because things like this leads to misinformation being spread. Drama about me or not, I hope you don't have to endure the backlash of people constantly correcting you.
And EXE slaughters people by the dozen and loves it.
And what does Sonic.EXE do every day of his life? He slaughters people by the dozen and loves it.
Which technically isn't wrong, but it's still pretty wrong.
No, it's pretty right. Anybody who knows Sonic.EXE knows full well that he's a psychopath that kills for the sake of killing. It's very clearly stated and shown in his stories and games. Yes, there's the part about enslaving humanity, but once he does, he's just gonna continue doing what he does best. Vicious, unapologetic murder. I was a little bit interested to see where your point would go, but it seems it led straight to a brick wall considering you don't bother to explain why I'm wrong here. You just say that I am and leave it at that. You can't just expect people to take your word for all it's worth. Points like this require elaboration, otherwise you end up losing any weight you might have had for the statement.
And the next panel... Yeah, so remember when I said to keep the canon stuff I just talked about in your head? This is not only when the fire starts, but this is when it's pretty already fucking big. We have a total of 5 fan-in videos! 5!
There's actually 8 videos here. 3 on the left, 3 on the right, and 2 in the middle. That's 8. 8 videos.
One of these being a fan theory that the creator of said fan theory later came back to said video and said that it was poorly done. The other 2 being Stronger Than You, Chara's response, and No More Deals. Both very popular fan content, but that's just what they are. Fan content. They aren't official. And on the other side, we have Play With Me, which... I mean, it's just fun, I don't know why it's being brought up here. But the bad thing being mentioned here is Torrent's Sonic.EXE trilogy, which if you knew anything by the trailers of this trilogy, you would know that this is not Sonic.EXE, this is not our main boy X. This is an old series before anything Joe Doughboy did came into the picture, and if you know anything about the series, you know that this is not our X. This is Metal Sonic. It's Metal Sonic, not even Sonic.EXE, it's Metal Sonic. It's a fucked up Metal Sonic.
Getting this out of the way really quick, the Metal Sonic twist is a retcon. A lot of people have brought that up in response to me using Torrent's animated trilogy, but I've also never gotten a proper response to it not being a retcon. When you watch that trilogy, there is nothing indicating that this EXE is in fact Metal Sonic. Everything about him screams with a neon sign that this is an adaptation of the original Sonic.EXE game, with the subsequent series Sally.EXE being an adaptation of that game. Hell, the guy is even quoting EXE's lines from the story word for word.
So many souls to play with. So little time. Wouldn't you agree?
And some lines in the trilogy don't even make sense knowing the Metal Sonic twist is coming.
You just don't get it, do you? Your pride and your self-admiration is your greatest weakness, Doctor. Years and years of your life spent deploying your pathetic contraptions in an attempt to defeat me were just all for nothing, weren't they? No matter what improvements you made, no matter how much you tinkered with your little toys, it just all ends in failure.
At least we know EXE likes pretending to be Sonic, so the speech, while a bit odd, makes more sense in that regard. So unless I missed something, in which case please point that out to me, the EXE showcased in that original trilogy is the OG Sonic.EXE.
And may I remind you, none of this is canon. None of it. It's all fan content. None of it. None of it is canon.
Honestly, this whole section of the video is laughable, and not in the way you intended. You just spent over a minute ranting about me showcasing these videos when you didn't even understand the point of the slide in question. This wasn't meant to showcase material that can be used for scaling, that's for later. This was meant to showcase the popularity of the characters through showing the most popular videos involving these characters, all of which have garnered millions of views, by the way. I honestly don't know how you missed that, considering I literally say it out loud in the pitch.
In case you're still wondering, like, you guys are a business, you gotta make money, so you're gonna wonder if the episode's gonna do well. Lucky for you, these characters are insanely popular. They're both in their heyday and nowadays. In their heyday, this is the video from during Undertale's heyday, 3.8 million views for Chara. There's an Undertale fan game focused on Chara, over 2 million views. And this is the most recent one, a Stronger Than You remake of Chara's side of that fan song. And within literal days, it got over 1 million views, and if you look back on it now, it has like 11 million views.
Alright.
And for EXE, honestly, it's a similar boat. The official remake of the game, over 1 million views. Play With Me, the song by Longest Soul ever, 3 million views. And the original animated trilogy made by Torrance, formerly Bratwurst, 23 million views.
Holy shit. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Game Theory did a lot of Undertale stuff. I actually don't remember if Game Theory ever did a Sonic.EXE video.
Matt had actually played the original Sonic.EXE game a while back, and that was certainly something worth watching.
Now, to give them some credit, they did acknowledge this mistake afterwards in a YouTube post, so they know they messed up in that regard. However, they also try to argue that showcasing the character's popularity shouldn't matter. So let me explain why it does matter. Death Battle is a business. They don't make all these episodes for free. They need to make money in order to fund them. And one of the ways they do that is through views on their episodes. Not only through making high quality episodes with high quality animations, but also through tackling popular well-known matchups and matches that feature popular well-known characters. Those kinds of episodes usually get them a huge amount of views, and more views means more money. Whereas episodes that tackle either lesser-known matchups or matchups with lesser-known characters get comparatively less views, and thus less money, which can discourage them from doing matchups like that in the future. It sucks for those of us that want more obscure characters on the show, but that's the way it works. So to assure them that the episode would do well if they were to do it, I handpicked popular videos showcasing the characters separately and together. 3 for Chara, 3 for EXE, and 2 for the matchup. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
And now, we get into the worst part of this whole thing, and where I lose my fucking mind.
Ooh, we got a rant incoming. I love rants. Let me get some popcorn. I just remembered I hate popcorn, so I got candy instead.
What we can use, Pamela. Can you see the issues with this picture alone? What on God's green earth is supported canon? Everything here is just fan content. No more deals again. A reanimated Trigger Reborn. EXE Trilogy, again. One last round. Nightmare Beginnings and Spirits of Hell. None of these work. I don't have to talk about Chara because I already have, but for EXE, dude, I gotta explain this shit again. We can't use Torrance Trilogy because it's not canon, and it's Metal Sonic. We can't use One Last Round because it's not canon, and because that's not our X. That, my friend, is Outbreak Malware Threat, not X. And Nightmare Beginnings EXE isn't our X either. That is another EXE named Executor. And we can't use Spirits of Hell either, because say it with me now, it's not canon. And once again, that's not X, it's Exceller. Why is fan content even being involved in this debate? I thought we were talking about canon stuff, not fanon stuff. The whole point of Death Battle is to see which characters are more powerful in canon. Not to see what the fanon power scaling is, and I doubt Death Battle would make an exception to allow fan content, because why in Gaia's name would they do that? Next panel is just him saying what they can't use for this debate, which is really funny given what he chose and what he's using for this, because, oh boy, this is gonna get interesting around the very end of the goddamn video.
Wow. All that anger, all that rage, and not once did you actually let me explain myself. I literally say in the pitch why this approach should be used in this particular instance, which unless you turned off your ears for this part, you would know since you watched the video.
I know it's a hard sell, because not many people really like using fan-made material, but I think in this case, it's actually worth it. Because, mainly for Sonic.EXE in particular, because he is a fan-made character for a fan-made genre. It's literally impossible for anyone but Sega to copyright him, and even then I don't really think they would want him for any reason in particular. And, and the genre of creepypasta that he comes from is entirely built on making any story with any kind of character. You're not beholden to one specific continuity. If you got a cool idea for a story, it doesn't matter if you're doing a Slender Man, Jeff the Killer, or even some other licensed characters like Red Miss Squidward or whatever. You can make your own story, and it may as well be canon. It's not really that way. And also there's the fact that no one really likes EXE for his original lore, for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
And if you're going to do that kind of composite for one, you should make it fair and do the same kind of composite for the other, because it makes no sense to do one thing for one and not the other thing for the other. But this also doesn't mean you can use everything fan-made, because both characters go into wild directions with their fan-made material. Namely, there are a lot of Undertale AUs, like Arrowtail, Story Ship, Crosstail, where the worlds of Undertale are vastly different than the original incarnations. So that would be off the table. And for EXE, there are a lot of different variants that are very much inspired by the character, but are by and large not the same character. Like, even just by looking at them, and you can clearly tell the difference. So I think weeding out those versions would be the best course of action.
Okay, you're clearly very knowledgeable on these guys.
Yes, I've gotten very invested over the years.
Now this is understandably the other part of the pitch that got the most flack, as Death Battle usually sticks to what's official for characters they use. So let me take this opportunity to further elaborate on why I took this route. For those of you who don't know much about creepypasta, it's essentially a genre of horror where anyone can write up a horror story on the internet and spread it around to people. It's kind of like SCP in a way, only with a lot less restrictions and a lot less quality control. Some are intended to be merely fictional, but more often than not, especially during the height of the creepypasta space, these stories were viewed more as real urban legends that could happen IRL. In fact, that's where the appeal came from. A tall man with no face stalking the woods at night, an eyeless man that sneaks into your house to steal your organs while you sleep, a demonic entity in a picture that will torment you forever unless you spread his image to everyone you know. These stories felt real to the people who read them, and that's what made them scary. It's also partially the reason why I say that creepypastas do not care about canon, at least not in the traditional sense. Most stories of characters like Jeff the Killer, The Rake, Laughing Jack, etc. don't really focus on having an ongoing storyline that goes from point A to point B. The main focus of these stories is to act as unique myths to spread around the internet, and the beauty of it comes from the fact that nobody was restricted to who they could write about. Anyone had the freedom to write stories about any character made from creepypasta, and the authors that made the characters didn't object because they either understood the freedom creepypasta gives them, or left the internet for whatever reason. That happened quite a lot. To name some examples, Eyeless Jack's creator made the one story, and after a bunch of fan stories took off, they wrote down a bunch of bullet points that could be used for an origin story, and gave it to the fans for them to go nuts with. Jeff the Killer had a whole kerfuffle with the original story being plagiarized, and the actual owner getting chased off the internet due to nobody believing him. Heck, even Slender Man, the one creepypasta to this day to be copyrighted, not only doesn't follow a traditional canon with the copyrighted material being more short stories existing in their own bubbles, with the only connected tissue being Slender Man himself, but in a 2011 interview, Victor Surge, Slender Man's creator, acknowledged how well Slender Man lends himself to not being tied to one specific canon.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I was always wondering is, with Marble Hornets, why, before that radio interview came out with them two, I always wondered why it was never, what kind of semblance or what kind of meaning the operator symbol itself was. I never really knew what it was. It was just a symbol that 2D Arc used a lot, but once I figured out that that's what they call him, the operator, instead of Slender Man himself, that I kind of started to realize that, yeah, you have your Slender Man, but they also have something, they have the operator, which they're similar, but yet the mythos between you and Marble Hornets, it's close, but yet not the exact same.
Right. Plus, Slender Man itself, lends itself to not being, pigeonholed into a certain storyline or canon or anything like that. So
exactly, there's a lot open to interpretation.
Right.
Now, I will admit that sometimes you can make exceptions to this method. If the matchup in question involves using a specific version of a creepypasta character, for example, Sonic.EXE, banning K's Jeff the Killer, or Marble Hornet's Slender Man,
The operator.
then it makes sense to only use what's canon to that specific iteration of that character. Another instance would be if the character does happen to have a traditional storyline that tells a real journey from start to finish, and whatever fandom stuff that exists out there is minimal and doesn't add much. However, that instance is so rare that I can only really think of two characters that would apply to, those being Ben Drown, who's got a whole ARG that lasted an entire decade, no seriously, and ironically enough, Red, who has the two stories, lore statements from the creator, and the fan game adapting a third of the original story. Don't ask why just a third, because I don't know. What I do know is that Ben and Red are pretty much the only ones like this. Two relatively small fish in an enormous pond. So when using most characters from the genre of creepypasta in a death battle, to me, sticking to just a narrow definition of canon, when the genre has almost never cared about giving characters a canon, doesn't feel right, as you're pretty much ignoring half the appeal of these characters, how versatile they are, and how many unique stories you can make with them outside of their initial introductions. Of course, this would make them much harder to research compared to just sticking to what any given person views as canon, but I truly believe that with the right amount of dedication and weaving through the weeds to determine what makes sense and what doesn't, you can make something great with them. It took me a while to fully nail down the list of what I view as supplemental material to the main material, but once I did, I truly believe that it works. That's what the points of these slides were, to give them an idea of what can be considered and what can't be. Versions of these characters that stick close enough to the main deal while throwing out the stuff that strays too far in its own direction. Obviously, making your own canon isn't something that everyone's gonna agree with. It's completely valid why people wouldn't like that approach. But with how the genre operates, I chose to pitch the matchup this way because that's what I'm personally looking for in a creepypasta matchup. Not just whatever was originally written up, but the fullest extent of what the genre is capable of. With that said, you're probably wondering why I went with the variants I did for EXE. Well, half of these guys are pretty much one-to-one with the OG and current versions, with only small, ignorable differences. The outliers people have taken notice of are Exedier, Exceller, OMT, Torrent, and the one we will discuss later. I've already explained why I don't believe in the Metal Sonic twist for Torrent, but after re-examining their lore, Exedier and Exceller have become more dodgy to me. I didn't originally think there were that many differences given how similar they both look to X, but looking back, said differences do amount to enough where I can understand someone not associating either of them with X. That leaves OMT, who really has no reason to be considered separate. Aside from his name, he's pretty much just an exaggerated variant of OG X, and there's even a parallel to X, with the Tail Spirit's name being Alan in the latest version of One Last Round, the same name as the Tail Spirit in the official remake and PC port. So aside from the recent exclusion of Exedier and Exceller, this is why I went with the ones I did. And I followed a similar philosophy with Chara, as the things I brought up with them are basically what-if scenarios that could feasibly happen within Undertale's timelines. Even Glitchtail, which came about due to Frisk going back on a genocide route, and the timeline being screwed as a result. You have every right to hate the bitch behind the art, trust me I do too, but we're examining the art by itself in this context.
Good times!
Now we go over to EXE, where he continues to use Torrent's version of Sonic.EXE, which I'm not going to say because I've already said enough to get my point across.
Funny, because that didn't stop you from ranting about me including fan and stuff for the entirety of Chara's section. Also, dude, that's just a render I pulled for a bad joke. I would think that's pretty obvious. Heck, I used the same render for the connections section, and you didn't complain then, why are you complaining now?
Good times!
And then we have fan game use again. And also, one of these images, well, yes, it is canon. It's old. It's not even, like, official canon anymore. This is EXE Round 2, which was only found, I think it was found media as of recently, but this shouldn't count because this is JC the Hyena use. And according to him, JC Hyena shouldn't be used because JC Hyena is a bad person. But then why is it here?
Well, not necessarily. Yes, the story I'm using was originally thought to be written by JC the Hyena, but it's recently been re-examined and found to have a few inconsistencies compared to JC's original vision. Namely, the whole thing about EXE supposedly living within the disc itself, a la Ben Drowned. But even if it was written by JC, I would still include it because it would be mostly in line with the original lore, which Johto Boy adapted into the main canon. What you're referring to regarding JC is a comment I said about JC's opinions on what's in line with EXE not mattering. Not just because he's a terrible person, but also because he doesn't own EXE anymore. The lore statements he's made can be included since Johto Boy confirmed them to be canon, but not his opinions on existing fan material. If Johto Boy or any of the other EXE owners have been the ones to say whichever fanon stuff isn't in line with their vision of EXE, then I'd be willing to accept that. But since JC said it, you can throw that in the garbage.
Good times!
Next panel are these, which are canon, but I'm not really sure on the legitimacy of the one in the top left, and I'm pretty sure this is old. This is Sally.exe, so this is very old, so I don't know the legitimacy on this.
If you want clarification on that top left image, that's a screenshot from one of the versions of One Last Round where EXE exits the game and laughs at you on your desktop. And ignoring the obvious fanon stuff, is it really out of the question for him to do that? Like, given everything we know EXE can do, not accepting the idea of him exiting the game to laugh at you on your desktop just because the source is One Last Round is really petty in my opinion. Hell, he literally does something similar in the official remake, which I showed 2 photos of in the slide. Also, regarding Sally.exe, yes, it's old, but it's still tied to the original EXE game, being a direct sequel and all. It's not like the remake of the original was a drastic overhaul or anything, it's just a better version of the original, and everything EXE's shown to do in Sally.exe is in line with the original. Age doesn't matter in this case.
Back to fan artwork, we have a fan game in the top left that I don't know. I'm pretty sure the middle image of Tails is taken from a fan game. Top right, it's Torrid's Sonic.exe trilogy again, at the very end of the trilogy. Bottom left, it's Takao.exe fan art, I don't know where it's from. The bottom right, that's official artwork. That's the only thing official here. At least I think it's official. I could be wrong. But anyways, back to the Takao piece. Why is Takao even being brought up here? I don't think Takao has ever been mentioned in anything official EXE related.
I wasn't originally going to respond to this point, but since they put an emphasis on it, I might as well explain it. That screenshot is from another fan game called Project-X, where the EXE in that one is pretty much just the original with small design differences and exaggerated powers. And one of these powers, as I say in the section, is weaponizing the souls of his victims to attack the player. The soul in question just happened to take Takal's form because the player character was Knuckles at the time.
Good times.
Next point is the fact that he mentions that Lord X wants to take over humanity, which actually is canon, which I've said. But I don't know what's going on with the image at the top left. I don't think that's canon. As you can clearly see, Tony really likes to use fanon content to prove why his matchup is superior.
Okay, now you're just being ridiculous. That fan art I used wasn't meant to be taken literally. It was meant as a visual representation of the commonly held belief that Sonic.exe physically scales to Sonic due to having his form and generally mimicking Sonic's characteristics and abilities. I literally say as much in the pitch.
Physically speaking, he generally scales to Sonic, though it is mainly classic Sonic you have to work with. Though it is pretty vague on that front since he's not that big of a fighter.
Seriously, dude, if you really didn't hear that, I'd recommend cleaning out your ears. I think there might be a chunk of brimstone wedged inside or something.
Alright, but cut the music. This is where I lose my damn mind. Because he proceeds to use Xenophanes. No, not that one, the other one. There you go. Yeah, he proceeds to use this one. I'm not even kidding. I'm going to show it right now. Boom. He's using this. He's using this. He's using Fanon Xenophanes. Not even the official one. He's using Fanon. He's using the Friday Night Funkin' mod. He's using the Friday Night Funkin' mod. He's using the Friday Night Funkin' mod. And it bears repeating. This isn't canon. And it's not our X. He's just an EXE, not the main one!
Yeah, I figured this would be your reaction. For a little bit of context, the official Xenophanes is one of the other EXEs owned by Astra, as I mentioned before. And apparently his name isn't pronounced Xenophanes. Instead, it's pronounced... Okay, I refuse to say it like this. Cam!
Yeah, what's up?
Can you pronounce this name for me? I really don't want to say it.
A bit odd, but okay. Xenophanes. Wait, Xenophanes. Am I reading this right? Knees?
Yep, now you know why I didn't want to say it, but thanks for your service.
You're welcome, I guess. See ya.
Back on topic, why didn't I use this Xenophanes for this segment? Well, not only is there literally just a paragraph of backstory and a tiny list of abilities, but the information presented isn't usable for verses. All it says is that Xenophanes was an alien that crashed to Earth and decided to take on Sonic's form, for similar reasons as X, I think, while also hiding amongst humans as this abomination. That's it. He sucks. And it seems like everyone agrees, considering nobody, not even his own creator, has bothered to do anything with him. No stories, no games, nothing but this paragraph of backstory and powers that are standard for every EXE under the sun. So I opted to use the version that was not only instrumental to EXE's rise back to popularity, but also was made in part by the co-owners to use as a springboard for both EXE's return and the canon version of Xenophanes being created. The latter may not have gone anywhere in the long run, but at least the effort was there. Hell, I'm not even the first person to abandon the canon version of a character in favor of the superior version. Zalgo, another creepypasta monster, has a matchup with the Scarlet King from the SCP Foundation. And instead of sticking to Zalgo's canon, which pretty much consists of a couple images featuring the infamous Zalgo text, and a paragraph about how this deity from beyond space and time will end humanity when its 7 mouths sing, people will instead throw that away almost entirely and opt to use Fear Mythos, an entirely separate mythos that features several monsters like Zalgo and Slender Man, where he has much deeper lore, powers, and feats. Forget the canon, Fear Mythos is where it's at. I know some will still argue that I shouldn't use the mod for various reasons, But like I said, they can have that opinion. It doesn't change my stance on it. Besides, in a post-Wile E. Coyote vs. Tomcat world, an F&F mob made by the co-owners of EXE somehow wouldn't be the weirdest thing they featured on the show. But anyways, that's pretty much the end of that segment of the video. The rest of it just involves them liking the art pieces I commissioned, which I'm glad about, and transitioning to the next segment. Said segment involves them bringing in a guest by the name of EvaTuber, who is a smaller Death Battle YouTuber that I've actually had a few chats with on Discord, and he covers the stuff I said in the comments of the pitch and the post I made after the fact. Before we start this section, note that the disclaimer I made about BG64 also applies here. Don't any of you think for a minute that I condone harassing this guy. Like with BG64, I'm merely responding to some of the points he makes in this section. I do not intend to start a hate campaign against him, nor should you. So please, keep it civil. With that said, let's see what he has to say.
Good times.
Now, a lot of his problems for me stem from the fact that he uses bad interpretations of the characters used. He admits multiple times, and even tried to use stuff like this in his own pitch, which you can see in one of his slides. Now, this is already a problem in Sonic.EXE's case, since he used other EXEs that had nothing to do with 2011 or the remake in 2017 after you know what.
I'm not going to respond to most of this, as I've already said my piece on most of it, but what I will say is that X is not more akin to an alien. He's not an alien at all, in fact. He's a creature made of dark matter born during a combination of various energies in the void between dimensions. What's more, there is no proof that OMT is an entire universe, at least to my knowledge. The only way you could possibly get that is from the self-aggrandizing speech he gives in the original One More Time game, and I don't think I need to explain why that wouldn't be a reliable source. He's very clearly gassing himself up here.
The family stuff with Chara is more prevalent and more willing to be bashful for me. I'm willing to bash out more, as I'm going to say. This is not shocking given Chara has one attack unless you use Risk. However, the biggest thing I want to mention with Chara in particular is that he 100% uses a headcanon as justification. Like in this screenshot, he mentions that some people, probably including him, mention that Chara represents a completionist mindset. I think Until being his favorite game with Chara being in this matchup and all would tell him that he's wrong, but unless you put the whole speech Chara game where they say they are a representation of numbers going up twice, then I don't know how you can be a bit more blatant at not knowing what you're talking about. There's obviously some discouragement from doing a genocide run, I won't deny that, but if someone was to do that, it would more likely than not be Sans rather than Chara.
There's a few things to respond to here. One, the only scaling that Chara would get from Frisk is specifically Genocide Frisk, seeing as they're resurrected as a result of a genocide route, gain all the power you gain from said routes, and have little to no involvement in pacifist or neutral routes. Yes, I made it no secret that I don't like the idea of using Frisk in Death Battle, but if you've actually seen my top 10 characters I don't want on Death Battle video, you would know that's mainly due to their best feats coming from the pacifist routes where they literally can't kill anybody. Neutral or genocide would be more tolerable, assuming you could make sense of the dozens of possible routes that can result from a neutral run, since they are more willing to kill someone despite not getting the best feats. So Chara scaling to the Frisk that pretty much only kills isn't as big of an issue as trying to smash together all the Frisks, even though that's fundamentally impossible without breaking the lore and morality of the character in question. Now regarding the whole completionist mindset response, yes, Chara does say that they represent numbers going up in a sense, but the thing is, those numbers hit a maximum by the time you get to Chara. By the end of the genocide routes, you are at level 20, which is the max level you can get, have 99 HP, attack, and defense, which is the max HP, attack, and defense you can get, and deal the max amount of damage you possibly can. You have maxed out everything and completed the game at the cost of all the monsters in the underground, and Chara was reborn from the determination gained from all of that. That is why the completionist mindset view was created. As for Sans filling the Punisher role better, while he does kick your teeth in when you get to him, what Chara does afterwards is a lot more impactful to the game. With Sans, he's a hard boss fight for sure, but you can get past him. He can be beaten. With Chara, they obliterate the world, get you to hand over your soul in exchange for restoring it, and then ruin your happy ending every time you try to get it. And unless you hack the game on PC, or delete your internal save data on console, these changes are permanent. No amount of resets are gonna undo it. You're in Chara's world now, and they'll never let you be happy after what you've done.
Next up, Tony Sonic, I want to be a bit blunt with this one. Now, with this reply here, he says that he has to use banned content to make it more fair. Alright, let me just drop a quick fun fact of the day. If one of your characters has so little to work with that you need to use banned content to give them more feats and abilities, etc. like that, that should be a dead giveaway that the character you're trying to justify just doesn't work in process. Especially since the characters you're using, the banned content they have is plentiful. Straying from one banned source is not going to help Chara get more abilities. If anything, they just get the same feelings that you would reasonably give to Frisk. However, Tony Sonic has admitted multiple times that he does not like Frisk and Death Battle, so I'm going to be fine losing battle if I even try to argue that one, so I'm not going to get anywhere.
This is a blatant misrepresentation of my point in the comment, and what's funny is that anyone can just pause the video to see that my point wasn't that the matchup can't work without fan and stuff, because it can. There's scaling and abilities from Genocide Frisk that you can use for Chara, and stuff within EXE's main canon that you can use. I just feel like the fanning route represents EXE better, as I've said. The point was that using fanon for one but not the other isn't fair in the slightest, because you're giving one character a ton of different advantages while limiting the other one to just what's considered canon, which puts them at a huge disadvantage. Like, say for example, Sonic.EXE versus Slender Man became a thing. For Sonic.EXE, they gave her everything, even beyond what's considered canon to the ring. The movies, the manga, the novels, the crossovers, the American and Korean films, and Dead by Daylight with some fanfiction thrown in there for good measure. But for Slender Man, they just gave him the movie, the 2 games, and the Something Awful pictures. Does that sound fair in the slightest to you? Because it really isn't by any means. That's the real point. Whichever method you go with, be it the limited canon or the plentiful fanon, you need to apply it to both sides. Otherwise, you'll just be accused of bias, which isn't something a versus debater wants to get into, especially in this community.
He also just casually says that creepypastas don't care about canon, which, like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna be a broken record, but that is not correct at all. They do what they want as long as they're making a horror story out of it. Tony, mate, brother, that horror story is the character's canon. Slender's horror story began his canon. Sonic.EXE's on a game cartridge started his canon. Like, they clearly have a canon. You just refuse to use it and bring in a character completely unrelated to 2011X or 2017X.
That's not a very good retort. Even though you could use the limited canon, I've already explained why I believe creepypasta shouldn't be pigeonholed into one specific canon and what I'm looking for in a creepypasta matchup, so I'm not going to repeat myself. What I will respond with is that I don't think you realize how limiting sticking with just the original short stories for any given creepypasta is, as they're more often than not just paragraphs of text with few feats or abilities stated and 1 or 2 images at most. Hell, with one of the examples you mentioned, that being Slender Man, he didn't even have a proper story when he was made. All he had was a couple images on the Something Awful forum, along with ominous blurbs of text, which is nowhere near enough to justify using him in verses. Now, maybe this is just poor wording on his part, and he really meant that you should just use what was originally written for them, along with stuff from just that author. However, I've already explained why that's not a good thing, and I'm guessing the reaction that you have to that is that the character shouldn't be in verses at all at that point. And if that is the case, then to each their own for those who disagree. And lack a sense of audio balancing. So for this next part, he goes into something I said regarding the canon version of Xenophanes, and I'm not gonna lie to you, this was definitely a mistake on my part. I really should have explained it better instead of just going,
"The canon sucks, the FNF is way better."
And I'm definitely kicking myself over that. The only reason this isn't a skip card is because during this part, he also includes a little blurb about Torrance.EXE being Metasonic not being a retcon, thus making him the first person to actually argue that point. And his response is, no it isn't. Brilliant argument there, bud. You should become a lawyer. But other than that one detail, I agree with everything he says here, and I'm sorry I responded like that.
Good times.
So, he already brought up the Xenophanes thing, but there's also the video that he mentioned briefly, being where he said that he doesn't want Frisk and Death Battle. I'd like to go over that real quick before I end this section off.
Oh, you don't like that video either? Are you gonna elaborate as to why, or are you just gonna list off half the characters I talked about and expect the viewers to think the video is bad based on that alone?
The video is pretty terrible on its own, saying that he doesn't want characters like the FNAF animatronics,
which I still stand by, especially given the outrageous scaling for Springtrap in particular.
Blaze the Cat.
That one I have warmed up to, pun not intended, thanks to Josh Scorcher's fiery fan fight Blaze vs Starfire, and Blaze vs Rivet is admittedly a cool matchup. However, I'm still weary on it given Death Battle's track record with Sonic characters, and sadly it was only reinforced with Bowser vs Eggman.
Boyfriend from Friday Night Funkin',
which I still stand by.
Monica from DDLC,
which I especially still stand by because despite some insistence, she absolutely cannot fight. But Monica vs Mina is an intriguing idea.
And Madeline from Celeste,
which I will always stand by. In fact, I find it morally questionable at best to think that Madeline works at all in a versus sense.
And then there's Frisk, who is his most unwanted. Can you see the irony here?
No, actually they can't, because you didn't link the video in your description, which means they aren't readily able to go watch it to see if my points are valid or not. Friendly commentary tip, when you're presenting your arguments, always be sure to link your sources, be they videos or blogs. That way people are able to see your evidence and make sure you're telling the truth. In any case, I've grown tired of arguing about Frisk, so I'll just give you the short version. Frisk at their best is pacifist. Pacifist means no killing. You have to kill to win a death battle. Good day, sir. And that's pretty much the end of the video. The little that's left includes a response to me trying to argue that Undertale Yellow and Sonic Mania can serve as excuses to use fanon content, which I'll admit was incredibly stupid of me to say, a recap of the situation as it was back when they made this, and an ending joke about Sonic.EXE versus Sin being the best matchup for EXE. I guess. In any case, this whole ordeal has been very tiring for me, and I seriously hope that this can be the end of it. If you happen to be watching this, BG64, while I can't stop you from making a response video to this, I would still like to ask that you don't. I would not like to keep this discussion open anymore. I do still intend to talk about Chara versus Sonic.EXE in a future video, and I'm also thinking about making a video discussing IPs and genres that get wonky when it comes to canon, but as far as this whole drama goes, I hope to end it with this. Once again, I don't expect anybody who dislikes the matchup to suddenly like it after this video. The only thing I wish to do was apologize for my bad behavior and bad responses, and give you all a better understanding of my position. Sound off in the comments what you think, I guess. Just please be nice about it as always, and for the final time, don't go and harass either of these two. I mean it. So with that, I guess I'll end this video with a question for BG64. Since you evidently hate the idea of using fanon content in any way, shape, or form, does that mean you work for Nintendo?